This is the Connor Chepnick podcast. Like I mentioned earlier on, I'm going to do some more reads out of this Bitcoin magazine, the Gatekeepers edition, the Gatekeepers issue, because there are some fantastic pieces in here. And today I'm going to read one by Whitney Webb, and I think it's really potent to kind of what's going on today in our world. For those who haven't watched, RFK Jr. recently went on Joe Rogan's podcast. They had a really interesting discussion. I think it's worth the listen. And after the discussion, Peter Hotez basically came out, who's a vaccine scientist, and basically complained that Spotify wasn't doing enough to censor Joe Rogan, essentially, which is kind of ridiculous because you think, the United States, we have the First Amendment, freedom of speech. That's kind of like the foundation of our Constitution. But anyways, I digress. I'll get into that after the read, but I just thought with that whole situation playing out and me reading this piece this morning, it'd be a perfect piece to read for the podcast. So without further ado, Understanding Gatekeepers to Undermine Their Influence by Whitney Webb. It should be clear to most by now that the reduction of American civil liberties over the past several decades has been directly correlated with a series of emergencies and crises that have been issued by the power elite to justify the removal of freedoms, including those guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Those that loom largest over the past 2 decades include September 11, 2001, and the resulting war on terror, as well as the much more recent COVID-19 crisis. We must relinquish some of our freedoms, we have been told, because it is responsible and helps protect the public at large. Yet, in reality, the reduction of our freedoms has done next to nothing to protect the public. Instead, it has helped to shield the corrupt elite from public scrutiny and accountability by robbing the public of its voice and its agency. One may find it surprising that Americans, who have historically valued civil liberties and individualism, would be so complacent in the face of the steady creep of totalitarianism that began long before COVID-19, and even before 9/11. I would argue that one of the key reasons why so many Americans are unaware of just how far we have fallen and how few rights we still have is due to the manipulation of media narratives to obfuscate how most, if not all, of the aforementioned crises are manufactured and then utilized as the justification to reduce and eliminate our rights. Key to achieving this misperception among the American and global populace is a class of media assets whose members advance certain narratives for generally one of 2 reasons: fear and or self-preservation. Those assets are known as gatekeepers. What is a gatekeeper? While it's more than likely that online opinions of how to define a gatekeeper vary, I see the term referring to an individual who either works in or is influenced in media that discourages inquiry or scrutiny of certain official narratives about major events, but will encourage inquiry and scrutiny of other and usually less significant official narratives. In other words, they will posture as critical of the establishment in certain cases where it is deemed, for whatever reason, socially acceptable to do so, but will avoid criticizing establishment narratives when they or others deem such criticism to be socially unacceptable. The discouragement practiced by a gatekeeper tends to be largely reliant on ad hominem labels painting those that scrutinize a particular narrative as crazy or stupid. In other words, there tends to be an effort to use social pressure to prevent a group of people from engaging with alternative narratives about that particular event at all. On rare occasions, a gatekeeper will admit that they steer away from certain topics and narratives in order to avoid being treated as crazy or stupid by sources or media groups they deem more authoritative or more influential among the public at large. Such tactics are very much tied up with the weaponization of the term conspiracy theorist, particularly that term's use as a pejorative. The term was first coined by the CIA to discredit those who criticized the Warren Commission, the controversial body that produced the official narrative regarding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. While CIA culpability in that assassination has now been broached on mainstream cable news shows like Tucker Carlson Tonight, those who previously suggested that the CIA may have been involved have long been derided as conspiracy theorists, not just by the mainstream media and American officials, but even by anti-establishment independent journalists such as Matt Taibbi, among others. However, even Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, believed the Warren report and the official story of the former president's death to be shoddy and inaccurate. Robert F. Kennedy was killed shortly thereafter at a time when he stood on a likely path to the American presidency, a position which would have allowed him to properly investigate who had had a hand in his brother's death. Given that much has changed recently about what is and is not deemed conspiratorial with respect to the Kennedy assassination, another narrative that is useful in exploring the gatekeeper paradigm is the official narrative of September 11, 2001. As I've previously noted, the official story of those attacks is based on the 9/11 Commission's report. However, the chair and vice chair of that commission, and thus the principal authors of that official narrative, have stated that the very narrative is incomplete and unable to explain major aspects of the attack. In addition, George W. Bush's counter-terror czar, Richard Clarke, has since accused the highest levels of the CIA of running an operation involving the accused 9/11 hijackers and then covering up that operation and information about it to and through 9/11. Notably, Clarke's accusations, which were publicly made over a decade ago, have never been reported on by mainstream media. Despite this, many prominent anti-establishment independent journalists who made it a point to ridicule anyone who does not believe the official narrative, which again, its very authors do not regard as authoritative, Taibbi previously mentioned in the context of maligning those who question the official JFK assassination narrative as conspiracy theorists, has been particularly scathing when it comes to insulting those who question the official 9/11 narrative. For instance, Taibbi has referred to those who doubt the official story as hopelessly stupid, dickwads, narcissistic, idiots, and clinically insane. Taibbi's writing on 9/11 Truth over the years has treated those who decline to believe the same actors who lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when it comes to the events of 9/11 consistently fail to engage with the actual information by so-called truthers and routinely devolve into ad hominem attacks. Whether Taibbi realizes it or not, by attacking those who believe differently than him with personal insults and attacks as opposed to engaging with the information present and alternative or unofficial narratives about 9/11, he is signaling to his audience that were they to engage with this information themselves, they too would be then hopelessly stupid. It is ultimately a dishonest game that seeks to use a form of peer pressure to steer people away from a field of viable research that happens to be inconvenient for certain powerful actors. Taibbi is hardly alone in this. Others, such as Alexander Cockburn, have taken a similar tone with those who do not share their views. Michael Schemer and the HuffPost went so far as to compare such people to Holocaust deniers. Another approach has been to argue not so much that 9/11 truthers are mentally unwell, but that the information that counters the official 9/11 narrative presents dangers to society. One independent journalist who has made such claims is Aaron Mattei of the Gray Zone. Mattei has branded researching information that conflicts with the 9/11 official narrative as leading to dangers and that journalists should avoid engaging with such information. Mattei's comments were ironically made during a 2019 panel about propaganda for Big Apple Coffee Party in New York City. Others, like The Guardian's George Monbiot, have claimed that those who question the 9/11 narrative present a mortal danger to popular movements and should be treated with the greatest disdain. The goal of such ridicule, ad hominem attacks, and fear-based messaging is to prevent people from engaging with the information put out by those hopelessly stupid and dangerous idiots. If the gatekeeper in question here were indeed well-intentioned, should they not engage with the information and use their own evidence to debunk such stupid arguments? Shouldn't it then be up to the reader to weigh the arguments of each side for themselves and reach their own conclusions? The answer is obviously yes, but doing so would be risky to the official narrative, which is ultimately what such behavior on the part of a gatekeeper seeks to protect. Others, perhaps in a different category of gatekeeper, take a different approach and avoid the issue of 9/11 completely, despite its critical role in the erosion of our civil liberties, illegal mass surveillance, and the illegal military operations abroad with significant civilian body counts that have resulted in major geopolitical instability. The aforementioned example of Mattei's comments seem to fit in this category, and he is joined there by other well-known independent media figures such as Michael Tracy and commentators intellectuals like Noam Chomsky. These gatekeepers might take this posture for a variety of reasons, including a strong desire not to be delegitimized by their peers as bearers of the conspiracy theorist smear, and an unwillingness to face a political reality where U.S. government officials may have been complicit in a deadly attack on American soil. In those two examples, however, the failure of such individuals, particularly in media, to even consider that there may be more to the story boils down to a desire for self-preservation, in the case of the former, and preservation of a particular worldview in the case of the latter. Yet in both cases, that casualty is the truth, and the cause is cowardice. Moving away from a gatekeeper paradigm. With all that being said, it is important to say that the term gatekeeper is often misused. Not everyone is a gatekeeper, particularly those who may be unaware of certain information at any given time, or those who change their positions and views over time. Such is the nature of learning and journalistic inquiry, and it is not necessarily malicious if a person needs time to develop the willingness to tackle hard truths or situations. However, what makes a gatekeeper different is that they refuse to engage with the information and encourage their audiences to similarly refuse to engage in order to further protect their careers, to preserve our particular worldview, or, in the worst cases, shield official narratives from scrutiny for the benefit, whether intentionally or otherwise, of the powerful through the use of ad hominem attacks and manipulative fear-based messaging. In other words, a key defining feature of a gatekeeper ultimately boils down to intention. A gatekeeper intentionally decides to dissuade their audience from engaging with information for reasons usually related to self-preservation or careerism. In some cases, one may even be employed by specific actors, including government agencies, to act as a gatekeeper for the explicit purpose of protecting official narratives from scrutiny. One's intention in journalism is important, and it is a key to make this intention clear and one's actions consistent with that intention over time. For example, in my journalistic career, I have openly admitted that in being sent new information about certain events and developments, my views on several topics evolved as I studied. No one can be a total expert in every field of study, and it is certainly true that some have unrealistic expectations for journalists. However, one must strive to incorporate information that is true and verifiable into one's work and to make it available to one's audience, even if one cannot make sense of exactly where that information fits or what its significance is at that time. Ultimately, journalists, like every one of us, are on a journey to acquire knowledge and communicate that knowledge throughout their careers. If one is truly interested in getting to the truth of a particular matter, they will accommodate and be receptive to new, verifiable information that is pertinent to the topic. However, if the response is ad hominem or aimed at scaring you from engaging with such information, they are likely in some category of gatekeepers. So the question becomes, how do we move away from the current journalistic paradigm that enables gatekeepers to be successful in keeping people away from important fields of study? To me, this necessitates that we stop looking for journalistic heroes who we hold up as celebrities, salient truth tellers, and begin instead to become responsible media consumers ourselves, engaging in researching the information put out by all sides and reaching our own conclusion. We should not be content with being told what to think by celebrity journalists who might report a story or two, or even more accurately, and tell a handful of truths that resonate with us. No one journalist or person has all the answers. To be free from gatekeepers and the harms they unintentionally or intentionally cause, we must value facts and evidence-based information above brand and personality. People need to become followers of truthful information more than followers of celebrities who happen to work in the field of journalism. Only then will the gatekeepers lose their power and their influence. Kudos to Whitney Webb. What an excellent piece. And I think what resonated with me the most is that, you have to read every side and then form your own opinions nowadays. Everyone has some form of agenda, some form of bias, and to take the time and see, what that person's bias or agenda might be is very important when you read something. And I also think the point about the censorship and the ad hominem attacks that happen with anything, really. I mean, you look at what happened after 9/11, it's so sad, and man, I hope the CIA wasn't involved in any way, and I'm not saying they are. I have no evidence they are. I was 4 or 5 when it happened. But what she painted there, that picture, I mean, it is insane that rather than, using evidence-based arguments and, pointing out how insane that theory might be, these people just ad hominem attack and call them conspiracy theorists rather than point out how flawed their thinking is through legitimate means. And then what happened after 9/11? Well, the Patriot Act, which took away tons of civil liberties, as we saw with Snowden, allowed the government to do mass surveillance, the war on terror. Even if the Patriot Act came with good intentions, the end result, the outcome has been horrendous. And then you look at COVID-19, same thing. Even if the intentions were good to try and save lives, to try and save grandma and grandpa, well, what ended up happening? They printed trillions of dollars. Now we have the worst inflation we've seen since, I believe, the 70s or the 80s. So no matter what the intentions are, the outcomes just are awful. I mean, I don't think unless you're a quintillionaire, anyone has appreciated that money. Now, if you're a quintillionaire and you got those freshly printed dollars first, well, I'm sure you appreciate it. But the rest of America, the people who don't have assets and, who thought, oh, wow, this $1,200 stimulus check is great. Well, it's like they printed 10 grand, gave the rest of themselves, and then handed you $1,200 or however much it was. And, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, let me share my screen real quick so I can show you what Peter Hotez tweeted out. And, in his defense, I guess, Rogan brought him up first on the podcast with RFK Jr., but we have the First Amendment here in the United States, freedom of speech. And Professor Peter Hotez, MD, PhD, said Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. It's really true at some journalists. Just awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense. So Joe Rogan very fairly said, Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is misinformation, I am offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit. And I think it just goes back to Whitney's point. Peter Hotez could agree, could point out where RFK Jr. was wrong. I would love to see that because I don't think everything RFK Jr. said was right. But I appreciate that he used seemingly facts to back up his information. And, now Peter Hotez is on a whole rant, if you look at his Twitter, about why he shouldn't debate RFK Jr. Here's an article he retweeted. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk instigate harassment campaign against vaccine scientists. Again, Peter Hotez tweeted at him first. Yeah, it's just, and then people piled on, and I think it was like over $1 million that would have been donated to charity if Peter Hotez would just debate RFK Jr. And yeah, here's something that Peter Hotez retweeted. Joe Rogan wants a scientist to debate a vaccine denier. Turning him down was the right thing to do, Vox. Ridiculous. But anyways, I digress. I got to go handle my child. But yeah, don't, if someone attacks something with ad hominem attacks, I am more inclined to believe the conspiracy theorist or the denier because they're actually, they're trying to present their side of the case, and then they're just getting ad hominem attacks. It's a signal, hey, that person might be onto something. So something to consider. And yeah, like Whitney said, read everything and form your own conclusions because everyone's got a bias. Every side is trying to push something.